for posterity's sake. And yeah, it should be a fairly open-ended conversation. So just to give you all an idea of kind of run of show, we'll spend the first 30-ish minutes just hearing from some of our panelists who I'll let introduce themselves, and then the last 30 minutes, and really as long as you guys need, we'll spend some time answering questions. It'll probably be around an hour and a little bit of change, but probably won't last the full hour and a half. And I think that's how much I blocked off of the panelists timetables, but I can't remember exactly when I set the end time on Eventbrite, or if I set the end time on Eventbrite. But all that being said, really appreciative of you all coming. And I see Mary Hannah's question. Are you all still hearing me okay? Is Mary Hannah the one whose screen is frozen?
Everything's working normal for me.
Okay, cool. And I did want to introduce Vicky Pridgeon. She's going to be, she's AC4D alumni and going to be kind of helping with just kind of manage questions and things like that. So she may chime in or interrupt. So Vicky, feel free to wield your co-host powers as you will, and appreciate your time as well. And so so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our panelists. And so what I'd like to do, instead of kind of brief intros and then getting into like the longer journey, I think I'd like to kind of start off with a little bit more long form narrative. So for our panelists, would love to kind of give quick elevator pitch of who you are and what you're doing. And then if you could just kind of launch into a little bit of your narrative around how you found yourself, or how you kind of eventually came to be where you are today, and specifically how you made that switch into design, and if those would even be the terms that you would use. So why don't, yeah, does anyone, David, Mary Hannah, Scott, do one of you all want to go first? Maybe David, while his internet is still working, while California still has internet.
Sure, absolutely. Hey everyone, David Bill. I'm a lead UX designer at Amazon, and I've been working there for about 3 months. Before that, I was with Booz Allen Hamilton, a federal consultancy. I'm originally or based in Washington, D.C., but currently out in California, visiting family. And my journey through design has been an interesting one, where since graduating from AC4D in 2016, I started with more of like a strategy route, but based upon the experience I had.
David, actually, yeah. Could you actually start pre-AC4D?
Yeah.
So like,
yeah.
Did you know about design? And sorry if you were going there, but if you were just starting,
I was going there.
Okay,
cool.
There,
sorry.
It's all good. Didn't mean to F with your flow. You go for it, man.
It's all good. It's all good. So basically, to follow Jonathan's lead. So way back when I started my career as some of the folks on the panel in the world of education, and so I was an outdoor ed teacher right out of college, taught middle school kids backpacking skills, and then made my way to teaching high school history after getting a degree and a master's in digital history. And really what I was doing there was focusing on how to leverage digital tools to make history interesting. And a lot of what I was doing, unbeknownst to myself, was leveraging a lot of the things that I came to learn before AC4D, as well as then deep in it at AC4D, around how do you create experiences that help people, how do you understand individuals and create experiences that let them accomplish their potential. So a lot of what I was doing in the classroom was centered around leveraging different technologies to understand the kids' capabilities, and then get them interested in expressing themselves in different modalities, whether it be audio, video, text. And so this was like 05, 06. And so this was blogging and video and podcasting were just in their infancy. And so through that, I ended up getting involved in a lot of professional development with teachers and helping them understand how they could do something similar with their classrooms. And through that, I did a lot of exploration on my own and trying to understand, okay, how could I be better at helping teachers incorporate these practices into their classroom? And through that, I came to find design thinking through the wild world of Twitter. And through that, ended up attending a workshop at Stanford at the D School in 2010, and got involved in really sort of at the intersection of design thinking and education, and was working with schools in and around the United States and in Canada, helping them sort of introduce design thinking to educators, as well as running creative workshops with kids and sort of helping them find their inner creative. But then as I was going through that process, I was realizing that while I was enjoying the work of being a quote unquote designer, I didn't feel like I was a designer at all. It's like I was really just reading off a PDF and felt kind of inauthentic. And so to really make sure that I could speak to a lot of the work that the designers I was surrounding myself with, I felt like I needed to go back to school and really build out some credentials and some skills that I felt like I was lacking. And so I was actually at South by Southwest EDU in 2015, and I was giving a talk there and pinged John Kolko and was like, "Hey, can I roll by and check out your class and see what you're all about?" Because I, as a progressive educator, I was all about trying to find systems and methods that are going a different path, but are rigorous and teaching you quality skills. And so I was curious to see how he went about his work, and attended a class, and it was hook, line, and sinker. And I applied soon thereafter, and attended that next year, and made my way through the program. Did a year of freelance service design mostly, but with an interest in getting into product design. And then, as I alluded earlier, made my way to Booz Allen, where I initially did some service design work, but then made my way into product design. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years.
Awesome. I have tons of things I'd like to follow up on, but just to see sort of where the evening takes us, we'll go ahead and popcorn it over to Mary Hannah and have her go.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mary Hannah. I'm currently working as a UX researcher at Ascension, which is a large nonprofit hospital system where Jonathan Lewis also works. And I, to kind of take y'all back to my journey. So I was in college, I was a political philosophy major, which really was just my excuse to try to spend 4 years figuring out how to be an ethical human. And emerging from that, I really did not know what to do with myself. And as you might imagine, there aren't a lot of political philosophy jobs out there. I did kind of bounce around. I worked at a think tank. I worked at a romance novel publishing house before kind of falling into education. And I worked as a teacher for 5 years, teaching middle school English and history, which I really loved. And as David alluded to, really has so many different applications as far as the same skill set coming into play in design. But after a while, I was getting a little burnt out with teaching, and I honestly, my mom got sick. I realized, oh crud, I need money. I need to go get a real job where I'll have like a 401k. And so I decided to go and for very mercenary reasons, decided that, hey, everyone in my life who seems to have a lot of free time and money, they're in tech. What kind of tech job can I do? And so I started out trying to do coding, and I hated it. And I knew I wouldn't be able to make myself do that. And so I went to a hackathon. And a hackathon, I kind of didn't know that designers were really a thing until I went there and I saw that those were the people who were really responsible for the parts of problems that I was interested in. really doing the deep understanding of what are the needs and how can you communicate with people in order to be able to like help them help themselves. And so with that, I just kind of looked around at what are the different design programs, went with AC4D, and merged from there, had my own startup with another AC4D alum for about a year, an education-related startup, and then went to work at various consultancies, most recently at Deloitte, government and public services, building websites and apps for federal and state agencies before finally getting to my current job. So that's where I am now.
Awesome. Scott, do you want to go?
I'll just skip. Hi guys, Scott Gerlach. I currently work as a designer at Argo Design, which is a consultancy that has studios in Austin, New York, and Amsterdam. They do all different types of design work, but my role tends to be sort of in that product design category. And for me, that starts with like early researching and working with clients to sort of understand a problem space and understand what sort of challenges they're facing, and then doing research, and all different forms of research depending on the scope of a project, to kind of understand how we might go about defining and solving those problems, and then going through a process back and forth with them of concepting to land on things that feel like realistic solutions, both in the near term, but then also set a long-term vision for products. And then we actually will work with a client and actually build those products as well. So lately I've had sort of the pleasure of working on a number of projects where we've been able to go from early stage to producing real applications that are solving problems kind of in the course of 6 months to a year, kind of repeatedly. So that's kind of where I've landed in the design world. I've been in that world for about, I guess, 6.5, 7 years now. I don't know. Time is a little bit distorted the last few years, as I'm sure it is for all of you. But I think how did I end up at AC4D and how did I end up as a designer? I think, I also had a background in education at one point. I actually originally went to my undergrad for mathematics, which is its own way of kind of not deciding what you want to do. But I ended up in math and physics education as sort of my first career. And I had a number of people who I was close to who ended up attending AC4D. And through them attending and kind of seeing the insanity of what they were going through, I also ended up attending some presentations along the way. And I think there was sort of this overlap in my life of being in a place where I think education was starting to feel stale to me in a way. I think I felt like I wasn't growing, even though I was feeling a lot of enjoyment about being part of other people's growth. And I think going to those presentations at AC4D, I started to see the types of problems that students were addressing and the types of ways that they were exploring them. And I think over a course of a number of presentations, I just became kind of infatuated with wanting to learn how to address things and approach the world in that way. And then so, yeah, that's kind of how I ended up applying, and yeah, it's been a pretty awesome, life-changing ride in that sense.
That's awesome, team. Jumping into a few follow-up questions. So one of the big questions that we get is like, do I need to go to proper traditional school for design, or can I just piecemeal things together through random books and courses and projects? Do y'all have an initial take on sort of how people should think about the skills or programs or kind of things that they need to do in order to begin to make that switch? Go ahead, David.
Yeah.
Thank you for using the hand emoji. That was really, feel free to do the same, other panelists. That's great.
Yeah, it's funny how companies have different cultures, and Amazon's got this like really weird culture where like if you don't raise your hand, people get kind of pissed off. It's kind of funny.
Dude,
But anyway.
from like a culture where like hand raising is not a thing, like I said that slightly in jest, but it was very helpful. An affordance that you have a question.
Yes. No, exactly. So here's the thing. There's a lot of great content that's out there. I mean, Google has their now certification program. There's a lot of things that you can download. But I think one of the really important things that I came to find at AC4D, and I think that Scott and Mary Hannah will echo this in many ways, is like the ability to build relationship and work in small cohort teams and be able to be in it like you are in the environment that we are at in AC4D can't be replicated in an online context. Like in theory, yes, you can do that through online cohorts. I've seen that attempted in various other online courses, but I think the reality that you're presented with at a place like AC4D is the closest thing you're going to get to replicating the real world environment. And yes, we're in like a weird bubble that is the pandemic, but in normal times, and even in the pandemic, the types of dynamics that you have to have with the intimate team of quickly building relationship and connection, being able to build rapport, and then be able to build off of each other and build trust. I think that is something that you can't get through an online course in many respects. And so, or reading a book or blog set. Those are great ancillary solutions, so support mechanisms, but you can't really replace that.
Point or counterpoint, Scott or Mary Hannah? Clap hands, not a raised hand for Mary Hannah.
Yeah, but instead I clapped. Okay, so I made an attempt. I'll just echo, I definitely agree with what everything David just said. And I think it's also just a matter of knowing what kind of learner you are. I myself, like, I know that I could buy myself a million books about something, and I knew that I would not be able to replicate the kind of rigorous education you get within a structured program by myself, because I like to have that social pressure and I like to have the community around me. So that was really important. And I think also, just to build off of what David was saying, that to me, there are a lot of books about how to build a customer journey map and how to do all these various kind of specific skills that you learn as a designer, but the kind of soft skills about how to take critique, how to give critique, how to fail and keep going, and how to just be willing to let go of perfection. Like, those are the sorts of things that you have to have as a designer, and those are the things that like a book can't teach you. I think I would certainly have had a hard time learning those things without AC4D.
Yeah, I'll dovetail a little bit and just sort of say, I think the style that you learn something in and the environment you learn it in, you maybe can't appreciate at the time how important that is in sort of the way you go about that thing. And when it comes to design, I think the foundation that you sort of lay in the way that you first build your ethic as a designer and your approach as a designer, you maybe can't appreciate how much that can be a well that you draw on, or it can be sort of a problem that you're trying to sort of work around. And I think one of the things that AC4D offers at just the highest possible level is access to the tools to build a really, really strong foundation of problem solving. We talk a lot about sort of the importance of autonomy in design. And part of what we mean by that, I think, is not just sort of like the assertiveness that maybe comes with feeling comfortable with your own approach to something, but your ability to look at something that is difficult or ambiguous and think about what different sort of tools you have to bring to that situation. I think AC4D is one of the few educational experiences I've ever had that sort of rides that line of, it's really structured, and yet it's mostly a scaffold, and that you are responsible for filling in a lot of that space and building your foundation in the process. It's really hard to simulate that without the things that AC4D is, which is in person, in collaboration, about real world problems, and through the guidance of people who sort of have the expertise to look at where you're at and offer feedback along the way. So I think, when I think about who I am as a designer, a lot of that still comes back to my 8 months at AC4D, and I still draw upon experiences that I had then in thinking about how I want to approach things now.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm hearing, and let me know if you all agree with this, is like, so it's not that, although I would like to think it is, it's not that like AC4D is the only answer to becoming a designer or switching a career. I don't think that's what you all were insinuating, but I think that the nuggets of like insight is that in order to really cultivate kind of long-lasting foundations that can propel a career forward, it needs to be an environment that's not a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to growth. And it also needs to be an environment where there's like forcing people to confront their own like weaknesses, demons, challenges in a really unique way, because I think like in order to become a good designer, it requires like pushing your brain to like the bounds of like what people can kind of understand, or the problems that people have been able to kind of conceptualize. And where that wall is for people is like different depending on the day, depending on the problem space, depending on the context. And what's unique about programs like Austin Center for Design that foster that sort of intimacy, vulnerability, and like really hard and sometimes brutal conversations and critique is that they sort of push you to that edge in a really good way. Would you all agree or add to kind of that, or disagree with that statement? Just trying to kind of identify some kind of heuristics or general pillars, whether it's something that's manifested by Austin Center for Design or something that's not.
I mean, so many thoughts for sure.
Yeah.
I think, one thing is like, yeah, AC4D was a really uncomfortable experience for me most of the time. And it is sort of part of that, having to confront a lot of things in concert that I wasn't particularly good at, and had to go through the process of feeling not being good at them, but still pushing through and trusting a method that I'm not comfortable with yet. And then in retrospect, being able to place it in an experience. I think that sort of, loosely structured learning is really valuable. And it is something that, regardless of sort of a program you're looking at, is something that you should pay close attention to, is to sort of think about, is there room for me to find my own approach in the style of curriculum that's here? And I think, unfortunately, because there is so much demand in design, it also draws a lot of different educational models. And I would say if something feels like it's too good to be true in terms of the amount of time that it takes to become sort of like a designer, and if it doesn't seem rigorous, then your resulting sort of start as a designer is going to be that same amount of rigor. And so I think it is something to pay close attention to when you're looking at different programs, is like, to what degree they sort of match the rigor that you want to approach this change with.
David, did you have something, or you didn't raise your hand?
Yeah. I mean, I think just building off of that, that's a great point on the rigor. I think that's one of the true strengths of what this program offers, is that, and Scott had brought this up around the scaffolding. It's creating that scaffolding. It's creating the structure for you to explore a lot of different directions, but you are an individual, and your own experiences and skills and comfort levels are going to frame how that scaffolding influences you, and it will push you in ways that you expected and in ways you didn't expect. I think, you know, and this is a refrain I've heard from a lot of different people in this program, and it was true for me too. This was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And holding that juxtaposition in place was really important for me, because I thought I knew what design was coming into the program, and the program really challenged me. And it was folks like Scott, who was my mentor, who really helped me recognize a lot of the fallacies that I had and helped me grow. And so not only do we have the program where you have that scaffolding, but you have an alumni network and mentor program that's really invaluable at helping you through the process and recognizing where your pain points are. And I'll go back to my initial point around where a program like AC4D thrives and excels versus like the online programs are out there. Like the community and network that you have access to within the AC4D community is like, it's top notch. And because you've got practitioners who understand what you're going through, they've been through the paces and understand the rigor and pain that comes with it, but they also understand like the light at the end of the tunnel and how to get there, and can help you through that.
Awesome. I'll ask one more question before we go to some of the chat questions. And it stems from this idea of like how wanting you all to unpack some of the messiness that can kind of come from trying to make a switch to designer. So like in a very like abstract or abstracted away sense, it's like, I don't like what I'm not making any money. I'm not having any fun. I learn how to become a designer, and then I make way more money. I have way more free time, and I enjoy life way more than I do right now. And like, can you help sort of illuminate like the realities of like what that path can entail, and potentially some of the things that like lessons learned along the way of like navigating a switch to a design career, and what was along the lines of what you expected it to be versus what was surprising, what was harder, what was where was it not quite the straight line from despair to riches and happiness. Mary Hannah.
I'll do it. Don't try to have a startup if you want riches. That's what I would say. Because that, especially if it's like a social justice startup, which is what I was trying to do. So yeah, that would be my number one bit of advice as far as the riches. But I will say, so what AC4D was really great at, and what everyone kept telling me, and why I pursued the path that I did, was that because I went down that path of having been a co-founder, even for something that was very modestly successful by any standards. I was in a conversation today with a VP of product, and he said, "Oh, you were a co-founder of a startup?" And he started talking to me differently. And that is 100% because I got the social entrepreneurship skills from AC4D to be able to go down that path. And so even though I kind of took that dog leg away from what had been my original goal of just material comfort, it really enabled me ultimately to get there. And yeah, I guess that's my story I would share on that front.
I guess I would say, for me, it was a little different, or that sort of narrative that you described, Jonathan, was less necessarily sort of about improving my life, and maybe more to me about wanting to have more impact in the world. And bizarrely, I don't know if I necessarily think that I do have more impact now with the work that I do, as opposed to working in education before. I think the goals that I had were sort of, in some ways, maybe like idealistic or naive, like this idea that I just wanted to be working on things that were really important problems and have an impact on a large number of people. I think AC4D actually did set me up to address those types of problems. But I don't think I really understood myself very well necessarily at the time. And what I really appreciate about, so here's the fundamental thing I didn't understand about making a big change in my life, is that when you change your career and you do something like learning a whole new style of problem solving, you're changing your brain. You're changing the way you see the world. You're changing the way you relate to people. You're changing the way that you approach problems in your life. And that means that you're fundamentally changing as a person. Maybe your ethics follow you through that process, or maybe they also change someone in the process. And so I think what I didn't appreciate about that change was that it wasn't about sort of a goal of a different circumstance, as much as being a lot more in touch with having skills that help me understand myself better, help me understand my work better, help me understand other people in my life in new ways. And so I would say for me, that's been sort of like the reshaping, and that the circumstances are sort of a result of that, right? Like I enjoy my work day to day and the types of problems that I work on and the way that those engage me mentally and sort of the emotional ups and downs that go with those, the frequency of my work in a way that I didn't before. And I think the other stuff kind of follows along. It obviously, the other aspect there is that like, if I wanted to work on those sort of like more civic problems that I maybe found compelling that led me to AC4D, I've seen some of the political trade-offs and maybe sort of work-life balance trade-offs that would take for me to work in those spaces. And for me right now, understanding myself, those aren't the spaces that I want to be in. So I would say what's been really nice about the foundation I have is that it has evolved with me as I have kind of understood myself better, understood what is compelling to me at any given time. I seem to be able to come back to my fundamentals at AC4D, find a way to be a designer in that area and be successful. And so I do think when you're thinking about a change, you should focus less on the outcome and more on what are the tools that you're developing and what's the perspective you're developing, because those are the things that are ultimately going to be able to kind of like shape you in that world that you're working toward, or that transition you're working toward.
I mean, it's hard to follow that. Scott has a way with
geez,
words,
man. Come on. As the sun slowly sets in the background.
If anyone like fell asleep during that, I'm sorry.
I will mention, we talked a little bit about impact, and I know that this was brought up in one of the questions, and I won't take away from that question immediately, but I will speak to Jonathan, your question, and build on the impact part a bit. And so I think a large part of what I took away after AC4D was a lot of questions around what it was that where I could really thrive, and how I could then work based upon the skills that I innately had and what I had learned at AC4D. And I was sort of left with a lot of questions around, okay, where's my place? And so it was a lot of exploration immediately after. So I think the important part, as one looks at AC4D and looks at the potential of going down that path, is like really trying to ask yourself, like, what are the things that you're really strong at? What are the things that interest you? And how do you want to build upon that? And are there areas that you are curious about that within the world of design or technology or social impact that you haven't yet explored, or that you bring that lens in? Because like that is the opportunity for you to sort of dive in and explore in more depth, as we go back to that question around the frameworking. Like, if you know you're strong in sort of research, or you have just an empathetic mind, and it's being applied in a context that is not necessarily in design but is aligned with it, but you're interested in how that could be applied in technology and sort of product design, that's a jump off point for you to explore. And I think for me, that was an important piece for me as I was leaving AC4D. Was like, all right, I understood strategy and research to a degree. I then was able to walk away with a better understanding of how do you take that and then go apply it and go build something. And as we like to say, is stop talking and make something. And so I think that was really important for me. And that then is bled into the work I do now, where it's very much about making something. And when it comes to impact, while yes, there are the routes of doing a startup that's very much focused on a social impact space. But I had a conversation with someone right before I joined Amazon. She had been fired from Amazon last year for organizing a group around internally around climate change and how climate change in Amazon impacted people of color and communities of color. And she was basically making the argument, and I was like, am I really walking into this place? Like, you think I should make the right move? She's like, actually, this is the right move for you, because a place like Amazon or Microsoft, where she's now at, like, the potential for scale is so much there, and there is a desire, and there are communities within these larger organizations that are dedicated to making change. And so you can find ways to make impact within organizations that are larger. And potentially you have a larger reach. You just have to be thoughtful of like where you want to take it, and where your interests lie, and find that path.
Totally. So I want to hit on the a little bit more of the social impact. Annie, you asked a really great question. But I think one of the themes that I've seen both in y'all's responses to like, is it that linear from like sadness to happiness and prosperity, is the students and alumni that I've seen thrive the most, fall in love with the method and the craft and the kind of self-discovery and refinement that sort of catalyzes, more so than like falling in love with whatever the outcome that this career will create for you. Because I think that the reality is like design, even though like design is very much can be very hard to break into initially, to find someone that trusts you with hard problems to solve. And the more that you're just focused on becoming a better creative problem solver, a better designer, refining that craft because you love it so much, that like just doing that work and trusting that process will result in more fulfilling outcomes. And at least that's what we've seen in our students and our alumni. And it's a lot of the coaching that we give is like, stop kind of fixating on like that first job and start fixating on like just doing really good work and growing and continuing to push yourself. Because that historically for us at least has resulted in better outcomes in the long term. And that's not to say that we don't, like there is like a very pragmatic aspect of finding employment and finding work, but it's more just kind of where is your heart in it? And is it just about kind of landing that first job versus are you finding a place within kind of a new way of thinking, a new way of being, a new way of looking at the world?
I was just going to sort of add on to that in sort of a specific way, which is that a lot of times prospective students are sort of interested in, well, how much do you guys focus on learning digital tools, right? Like, will I come out of this and be an expert in Figma? And it's a really good example of where AC4D maybe doesn't have as much of a focus on it's going to teach you those digital tools, like it's going to hold your hand and teach you all of the things that you need to do in those tools to make things, but rather it's going to set you up in environments where you need to make things to communicate something in the course of a project And you're going to be given some intro to that tool, maybe a light scaffolding, but it's ultimately going to be on you to develop a digital fluency in that tool and then make things that communicate it and be evaluated on and get feedback on the things that you make. And that tends to drive your progress, in my experience, a lot more than sort of like a very structured thing that's designed to teach you the tool itself. And it's the same in actual application. When you're gonna work on a project, you're sort of have to look at what tools are out there and figure out what's going to make the most sense in the time frame and make it work, and ultimately be evaluated on the things that you produce in that time frame. So just something else to consider when you sort of look at programs is if you're sort of thinking about, will I be certified in this, or will I know these tools super well, versus, will I know how to make things that communicate at a high level? Will I know how to evaluate whether the things that I make are doing what I want them to do? It's a good sort of like example of the difference between an education that focuses on the methodology versus maybe the outcome.
All right, now going to some of the questions in the chat. So Annie has a question about the social entrepreneurship focus of the program, and curious how, and I think we're now, given that many of the folks joining are understandably prospective students, removing not all these questions will fall squarely into like, how do you pivot to a design career? But I think that's totally fine. So the question is, given the social entrepreneurship focus of the program, can you all share more about how that aspect has influenced the work that you are doing now? Yeah, who wants to take a crack at that one? Mary Hannah.
I'm in. So I'd say that comes into play much more often than I would have suspected. When I joined the program, I was looking forward to the social entrepreneurship part of the curriculum because I wanted to get that kind of ethics training about how to be a designer and not be evil. And that was important to me, but I never pictured myself being a business owner. I never pictured myself approaching things from that perspective and that level of kind of responsibility and accountability. And what I found in my work, especially looking for, honestly, every single job I've had, but I'm thinking particularly about working for Deloitte, working on making decisions about how different government agencies will present themselves to the public and what they'll make easy for the public to do, what they'll make hard for the public to do, things like that. Being able to kind of make those kinds of choices about and have training to make those choices about what is most important to people, like identify what's most important to people, what's going to help them the most, how does that intersect with what's technically feasible, how does that intersect with what's viable, how does that, all those kinds of choices that are a combination of kind of more pure design choices that are driven by user needs, and then also taking into account those kinds of business needs. Like that's a skill that has come in so handy, and being able to bring kind of a social justice lens on top of that has made my work much more meaningful. Yeah, so that's what I was thinking about.
David?
Yeah, I mean, all of us came in with an education background or background in being educators. And so I think that
was totally not planned, by the way. Like as you're given, like, oh man, like everyone was in education. Way to pick a diverse panel. Anyways, continue, David. Every time, please don't talk about how you guys are all like the exact same human. It just like hurts me.
No. I think what I was getting at there is that was very much a reason why I attended AC4D, was because this idea of social impact was very much the core of what I wanted to be doing. A lot of what I was doing, I was living in San Francisco before moving to Austin for AC4D. The world I was in social impact space. I was doing a lot of work with the city of San Francisco, and leveraging civic design and working with architects and working with the city to implement all kinds of different projects to help communities with the homeless population and young people in various schools throughout the city. So that was very much a line that I wanted to build out when I got the AC4D, and I continued it afterwards. Like Mary Hannah, I went and worked for a federal agency, federal consultancy for a number of years, and was tackling a lot of the same questions that she mentioned. And that is still very much a thing that I want to continue to have be a part of my life. I also recognize that there are opportunities that present themselves sometimes that may not look like they're in align with social impact, but you're building skills that will help you to take your career to the next level. And so while I'm not in social impact space right now, I am building the skills and opportunities that are going to provide me an avenue back into that space in a way that's going to be at a level I couldn't have done before. So don't always feel like you need to if social impact is important to you, don't feel like you have to have a job in social impact always. Think about the skills that you feel like you need to develop and the experiences that you feel like you need to incorporate into your portfolio, if you will. That will then help you then be your full self when you want to invest in that public space or that social impact space.
Really briefly, I want to touch on that theme of sort of like social entrepreneurship and social impact, in the sense that I think one of the things that we do as designers is we look at extremes for inspiration. And I think when you talk about social entrepreneurship and social impact, ultimately you're talking about the ways that we define value or don't define value well, right? Like the areas of our society that require social entrepreneurship and call for social impact are that way because the structures of our society are bad at addressing those types of problems. And the structures we've set up don't seem to interact with human behavior in a way that we address those areas well. So that idea of looking at a place that has complicated problems where the structure doesn't currently meet the needs of a given population, and then talking about how do you define value and how do you deal with problems of feasibility, I think I use that in my work all the time. And having done that at AC4D in areas that are sort of immediately compelling, addressing problems like homelessness or healthcare, they force you, and then also looking at them from a system perspective, they force you to develop tools in kind of an extreme case that then you can apply to a whole spectrum of problems. And so whether you want to work in that social impact space or whether you want to work on problems that maybe don't have those same sort of social characteristics, but might have other characteristics that are gnarly. I think that you come out of AC4D with like a skill set where you feel like you can address just about any problem that someone puts in front of you. Maybe you're not an expert at it, but you don't feel completely intimidated by it.
The other thing I'll add, and so just for quick context, I was one of the first graduates of Austin Center for Design. So Vicky was like, "You're a panelist too." So my 2 cents, damn it, is.
And you didn't have a background in education either.
I didn't have a background in education. That's why I'm like inserting myself, like, ha ha ha, I'm different. But in terms of social impact, like, frankly, it's hard. Like, I think everyone that went to AC4D legitimately cared about trying to make the world a better place, as maybe Pollyanna as that sounds. And the way that people take that forward is different. And sometimes people wrestle with like, I have these values and these ethics, who gives a crap about, I'm trying to think, high frequency trading, like, or like insert random project that you're working on. And I think the nice thing about one of the values of AC4D is that it surrounds you with a community of folks that like get that pain, that tension, or that struggle, and can kind of engage with you there. But I think the other thing, like, we have a range of students that like graduate and go directly to work and continue to support nonprofits. We have one alumni who's doing that in rural Oregon. But social impact can take has looked very different for other people. We had one graduate whose mom got terminal cancer and went to work for IBM to support her family. And then once her mom passed away, used a lot of the skills that she learned at AC4D to think about community development in a rural town just outside of Austin. And has since like started a nursery, beer garden, you know, it's a really beautiful thing. And that feels impactful to me. And then I think the other thing is like the divide, everything becomes a design challenge, a design problem. The divide between like work and personal life is bullshit. And so like, since graduating from AC4D, I've had the opportunity to engage with a lot of different impact-oriented organizations that I would have never had kind of reason, or they would have never wanted me to kind of engage with them had I not had the skill sets that Austin Center for Design provided me with. But it is a struggle. Like it's hard, right? Like how do you navigate the desire to have an impact with other desires, needs, you know, realities of life? Yeah. I'll address one of the very pragmatic questions we have from Olivia. So Olivia asks, could you talk about the Capstone project if you're approaching a business nonprofit agency? Any tips for setting ourselves up for success and working with them? What were the impacts of the Capstone on the Oregon agency, and what was that impact on your portfolio? So there's a few, there's like a, I think what if I'm understanding is what's the Capstone project like, and what impact does it create, and how does that benefit you? So there's a few, every year is slightly different. Most years there is a project or two where you're working with local organizations that have some sort of impact-oriented lens. And then you're also working on kind of a more or less full year capstone study year project that sometimes is directed at serving a particular organization and sometimes is focused, takes a more entrepreneurial bent and is focused more on designing and experimenting and piloting net new opportunities and solutions to address some sort of large scale social or humanitarian issue. And so, the impact sort of range depending on what an individual student group chooses as the focus of their capstone. But for the groups that have chosen to do things that serve a particular organization, the impacts, like most organizations generally come back with like positive responses and generally taking a lot of the recommendations or advice or design solutions that we have, we recommend. I'm drawing a blank on the specific examples, and the tidbits that I do have are not, I want to do justice. So Olivia, I can follow up with you there, but it's a very good question. This next question is for the group. And is there anything that you'd wish you had known before starting at AC4D or before switching or starting your design career? Like what would be something that you wish you would have known before starting on that career switch?
I can jump in on this one. I've given this a fair amount of thought over the years. I think that one of the things you have to recognize is that it takes a lot of persistence and determination and resilience. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs with anything, especially as was alluded, making any change in your life. Like there are going to be a lot of things that are you might expect, and then there are a lot of unexpected shifts that take you for a ride that in some ways is very rewarding, but in some ways can be a shock to the system. So I think it's just like being resilient and knowing that while there might be some lows, like as I think we've all tried to talk about it to varying degrees, is like you're building a set of skills that go well beyond just this application design. You're building a way of thinking and a way of problem solving that is applicable in a lot of different domains. And so whether you stay in the world of design or whether you end up going and building something entirely different, those skills are going to be really important. And so being able to be resilient and to be determined to stick through it, I think that is really an important element that I wanted to make sure I kept a hold of when I had those moments of like, why did I do this?
Totally. Before I kick it over to Scott or Mary Hannah, attendees, if you do have any questions, please do be entering them in now. We're starting to get towards the window where we're happy to stay on and answer questions. But if there's no other questions, we'll also be happy to sign off as well. So Scott or Mary Hannah, question on the table: is there anything you wish you had known before starting a career at before starting your design career, before starting at AC4D?
I'll jump in. That's kind of two separate answers. AC4D, I would say the number one thing that I wish I had known, or that I wish I had listened to, because everyone told me, was that it would be hard and that it would be a full-time thing. And I had always done well in like academic programs before, and I was like very arrogantly like could not conceive of a program that I like couldn't handle and also have like 2 part-time jobs on the side and like do all these things and have like full night of sleep, all that kind of thing. And so just be prepared for it to be like all consuming, but in like a glorious way. Like my business partner that I met during AC4D, like we still talk almost every single day. I still talk to him.
My gosh, that's awesome.
I love him. He's so great.
I do too. That's why, yeah, that's so cute.
Yeah, and those skills I use every day, and just like echo what people have said earlier. Like I literally have sticky notes around my room about personal problems that I'm going through and trying to like use the methodology and I do use the methodology to work through them and figure out what I should do in my life. And so it's really valuable. It's worthwhile in the end, I guess is what I'm saying. It's hard but great. And then as far as after, what I wish I had known is that design, unlike teaching is so much, it's kind of this, it's not the same no matter where you go, but so many aspects of it are the same because like it's you alone in the classroom with kids. So you're just in control of the space in a way that in design you're not, because you have to collaborate with so many other people. And so the structures around you matter so much more than in my prior career. And so I would just say I didn't realize how much I needed to experiment with what kind of working environment would work best for me, like what kind of relationships with coworkers and with stakeholders. I didn't know that was something that I would have to figure out for myself. So I think just being okay with, a lot of people will ask you the question when you graduate, what are you interested in? What do you want to do in design? And I definitely did not have an answer because I was like, I'm just learning this. I want a job. But now after a few years, I have a much more informed opinion. And so I think just being willing to kind of go with the flow and take what opportunities that come and then figure it out later. You know?
Now, Mary Hannah, you said something that I identified with in terms of sort of that idea of the modalities we work in or the rhythms we work in. And I think the things that I wish I knew before starting at AC4D are probably things that would have been impossible for me to know. I think, I had a number of people that I was close to in my life go through AC4D and got to see it from the outside. So arguably I had as much pre-knowledge as I could kind of going into the experience. And it was still definitely, as David said, like a shock to the system. I think I wish I better understood what things worked really well for me and my own relative strengths and weaknesses. I think I hadn't really gotten to a point when I started that switch to design of really accepting my own strengths, just as much as sort of not understanding my weaknesses. But I didn't appreciate that narrative was a skill that I had, and how useful it was and all the different ways I could apply it. I didn't have as much appreciation for my background that, sort of I had some talent in terms of math, and I wasn't necessarily willing to bring that to all the different parts of my life. One of the things in that uncomfortable process at AC4D was like forced me to take things that I was strong at and had a deep expertise in and find new ways that they applied in my life. And then it also sort of made me be obsessed about some new things in a new way, pushed me to some gears that I didn't know I had, showed me what I was capable of in condensed time periods in a way that I didn't really understand. And those became new sort of standards that I knew post AC4D were tools that I had, places I could go. I would say in that sense, it has also forced me to do a lot of learning afterward, learning about how to take that new intensity and balance it in my life and balance it with the other parts of me and make it kind of fit into the other parts of my life that are also important to me. So I think, those are the things that I wish I understood before I went to school, because I think, I've talked to alumni before, and I've even been at presentations before and been like, what would it be like if like you went through this process again? And like part of me sort of is like, it would be just as hard, like every bit as hard. But then there's this other part of me that knows that I have a comfort in some of those spaces that there's just no way to have without experiencing them. And so I think I wish that I had understood those things about myself, because I think that experience of AC4D would have taught me different things then. But I don't think there's any way I could have known those.
Awesome. So in searching for a perfect question, to end on, which I don't think there is one, Vicky had, I'm gonna put all the glory as well as the shame on you, Vicky, for this last question, which I actually really like. So if you had to sum up your experience at AC4D in 3 words, what would those 3 words be? You can take a moment to think about it. Mary Hannah can write them on sticky notes that she has right there.
I will also offer that another reason I like this question is because it inspires you to respond on the spot, which means you can go ahead and unmute yourself and say the first 3 words that come to your mind. No need to think about it too long.
Okay, so my 3 words are sleepy, crucible, and relationships.
Was that second word crucible?
Crucible, forged in the fire. Yeah.
All right.
Off of the play. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay,
David, what do you have for us?
Yeah. So rise from the ashes, I guess.
Boom. 3 words strung together. Love it.
Oh, I see what
Scott,
you did there.
top that. Scott, top that.
No, spotlight.
Nothing so pithy.
Nothing so pithy. You guys have changed the way that this runs. All right.
Good to see you too, Scott.
I took the spotlights off, so now you have to manually shift folks your view back to see everybody in gallery. Sorry about that Zoom thing, but thank you guys all for humoring that question.
All right. Well, to our attendees and panelists, Scott, David, Mary Hannah, thank you all so much. You all are awesome. Really, really appreciate your time. And then attendees will follow up with you all via email in the event there's any additional questions or information that you're wanting from us. But yeah, just really thankful for you all and for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening and we'll be in touch. Thanks all.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.